All right, let's get started. Today, I'm going to share with you three things. The newest PPP Flexibility Act of 2020 was just signed into law. I'm going to explain all that to you. Number two, there's a push to have all PPP loans forgiven under a certain monetary threshold. And number three, I've collaborated with the good people at Bench Accounting to explain one of the most frequently asked questions that I've been getting and one that I discussed on previous videos. So stay tuned for that at the end. You're not going to want to miss this. You've heard right. The Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act was just signed into law, and it gives borrowers more freedom in how they can spend the funds while still maintaining the possibility of 100% of forgiveness. Now, to be clear, how this applies to the self-employed, independent contractors, gig workers, you're going to have longer to spend the funds. However, you still only have 8 weeks worth of payroll to spend and be forgiven. So that extension actually helps you to spend some money on the expenses that have the possibility of being forgiven, such as rent, mortgage interest, and utilities. Now, I've done a whole video on how you can get your PPP expenses forgiven if you're self-employed, and we'll get into later how you can access that home office deduction. So is this good news for the self-employed? The answer is yes. In some ways, some things stay the same. You still are going to get loan forgiveness based on that line 31 on your Schedule C. It's still that same calculation of line 31 divided by 52 times 8. That's the amount of payroll costs that can be forgiven. However, you now have 24 weeks worth of expenses in terms of those approved expenses that we just talked about, where you can also track those expenses and have those forgiven as well. So other good news is that the PPP loan term has been extended. So instead of having 2 years, you now have 5 years. So they've extended the loan term based on when you got the money. And another thing that changed, which is very interesting, is the amount of time you have where you can defer payments. It used to be very short amount of period, and now it's 6 months from the time the SBA determines the loan amount that is going to be forgiven. So let's just say you only get 75% of your PPP loan forgiven. You then have 6 months after that determination before you have to start paying the principal and the interest fees. So overall, that's some really good news, because not only do you have more time to spend money on some of the expenses, you now have the ability to figure out if something is not going to be forgiven, how you can make those payments with your 1% loan. And of course, that 1% loan is now spread out over 5 years instead of 2. And one other thing to point out, they also extended the amount of time you have to apply for forgiveness. I know many of us were thinking that after the 8 weeks we were going to start to apply right away. They actually give you up to 10 months now to start that paperwork process. And if for some reason you don't fill out the loan application, they are saying that it will immediately begin to be due after those 10 months. So of course you want to get that paperwork in after you've spent the money, but you also want to take the opportunity to extend the amount of time you have to spend those funds to the 24 weeks, and then you still have up to 10 months to get that loan application for forgiveness submitted. Moving on. Some really exciting news is that the big banks are pushing for blanket forgiveness for all PPP loans right now in the amount of $150,000 or less. Now, to be clear, this is not law yet, but the Consumer Bankers Association and the Bank Policy Institution, who both represent the big banks, are pushing for that blanket forgiveness for anyone who got a PPP loan, simply to save a substantial amount of time and money. In their letter to Congress, and I'll go ahead and read it here, it says, "Their time and resources would be better focused on getting the economy safely back up and running, not processing burdensome paperwork." Now, to be clear, this also helps the banks as well, because any unforgiven portion becomes a loan that the banks then have to keep on the books and continue to process. And they've just extended that PPP term, so now these loans could stay on the books for up to 60 months. And it's a 1% loan, and these banks don't want to deal with that paperwork and keeping those loans on the books. So you might be asking, why did they pick this $150,000 threshold? Well, something like over 25% of all PPP funds are included in that $150,000 or less. But the really interesting part is over 85% of PPP loan recipients fall in that category. For example, many of the self-employed are not receiving a loan that's anything more than $20,000 or so. And so that, of course, would take care of all of them. And in addition, it would take care of people that maybe had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 employees, but are still under that threshold of covering the original loan amount. Now, even though this isn't law yet, I wanted to say that if you've been on the fence about applying for this PPP loan, it might be a good idea to get on it right now. As of this recording, there's still a few weeks where you could apply and hopefully get that loan processed. And those funds, fingers crossed, if they end up getting forgiven, could be something that you'd be kicking yourself later for not getting that free grant. And our final topic today has to do with the expenses portion of the PPP. Last week, there was some confusion online of whether or not you could write off things like your home office, your utilities, your rent, your mortgage interest. And the answer is yes, and I teamed up with the good people at Bench Accounting. Now, this video is not sponsored by them, but they've been my go-to resource online for all things PPP and self-employed unemployment. Basically, they're a bookkeeping company that provides online software to help small businesses track their expenses. I can show you a little screenshot here. If you take a look here, Bench provides things like profit loss statements, income statements, balance sheets, your top 10 expense categories, and what your net profit is. So it takes and turns your transaction data into tax-ready financial statements. Also, they have this really cool chat feature. So you have a dedicated bookkeeper that if you have a question, you can send them a message and then they can reply. And if you need to book a call with them, you can hop on a call as well. So I reached out to Bench and I asked to collaborate and asked them if they could answer this question for us as North America's largest bookkeeping online service. They said yes. And specifically, Brendan here made a video, and I figured we would put on the old headphones here, take a listen, and see what he has to say about how you can use your home office as an approved PPP expense. Let's take a look.
Hey everyone, my name is Brendan. I'm a part of the client relief team here at Bench Bookkeeping, and I'm going to just try and clarify some of these questions that we've had around home office adjustments. There's been a lot of confusion regarding home office expenses and whether they are an eligible use of the PPP funds that can be forgiven for self-employed individuals. The reason why there's all this ambiguity is because the SBA has been unfortunately and notoriously unclear on this subject. What we do know is that a home office must have been in place and could have been included in your 2019 tax filing as expenses to be eligible for forgiveness on those costs in that 8 to 24 week period that you now have to use the funds.
So let's stop right there. That was really important. You have to have claimed these home office expenses on your 2019 taxes in order for them to be eligible for loan forgiveness. So let's dive back into the video and hear about how you can claim those expenses.
To qualify as a home office, you must have a space that is completely dedicated to work and not used for any other purposes. So for example, if you are using your garage solely to store inventory, that's likely going to be eligible to be considered part of a home office expense. You're using a dedicated part of your home solely for business purposes. But if you just have a desk set up in your room that you complete work on from time to time, and let's say you play video games in there after hours, that is unfortunately going to be ineligible as it's not strictly for business purposes.
So that part there, that is key. Right here on the other side of this little desk is our garage on this side of the wall, and we are turning that into a YouTube studio for me. That's going to be a dedicated space that I can use because, as you can see, I'm basically in our kitchen, living room, dining room setup. So if you have a dedicated space that you can use that is going to be claimed on the 2019 taxes, then you're going to be able to use that in a prorated amount for the PPP expenses. But there are two ways to calculate that home office deduction. So let's get into the way you should use in order for those calculations to be crystal clear.
Now, when calculating home office expenses, you might have heard of two different ways to determine the amount. The simplified method uses $5 per square foot as a flat rate calculation, and then there's the regular method. The regular method is when you're actually going to calculate the percentage of your total square footage that is dedicated for just business purposes. So for the example of that garage, how much of your home's total square footage does that garage take up? And you're going to be able to use that percentage to calculate the amount of the expenses that you're eligible to apply for forgiveness on. So the reason why we recommend going with that approach is because you can actually itemize your costs from the mortgage, the rent, the utilities, whatever you're actually going to be applying on.
And I wanted to stop it right there too, because that's the point that I wanted to make. If you have rent expenses and you use that regular method, then that regular method is going to show you the rent itemized. And that rent itemized is going to then be on your 2019 Schedule C. And the same thing goes for utilities as well. Now, for the purposes of your PPP loan, just showing that Schedule C and coming up with documentation that you have rent or you have rent utility expenses that you're going to provide isn't going to be enough. So let's dive back in and watch the rest of this video.
In providing documentation, we definitely recommend that if you're going to be going with the regular approach, don't just provide the receipts for the payments, don't just provide the utility statements and the rent statements or whatever you need to provide in your given case, but ensure that you're also providing a calculation of that square footage percentage to show where you're getting those amounts from. I hope that clarifies things. Feel free to tune into our YouTube channel or follow our Twitter or other social feeds like Facebook or Instagram for the most up-to-date information on the SBA Relief Fund.
Okay, that was super helpful. So not only now do you have the 8 weeks or 24 weeks to use up the rest of the PPP funds for the purpose of these business expenses, but now you know how you need to track them and have them show up on your 2019 taxes, along with the documentation necessary to get forgiveness when you apply for loan forgiveness. Thank you so much to Brendan and the good people at Bench. Again, I've been using them as my online go-to resource for months since I've started this YouTube channel. And with tax season right around the corner, they are offering a deal where you get a free trial of their services. I'll leave a link down below. In addition to that, if you decide to sign up with them, you can also get 20% off your first 6 months. So that would take you right through right now, get everything in order for that PPP, and then right through tax season. And they can help you with the taxes as well. Okay, let's wind this thing down. I mean, I have been talking PPP almost every single week, but I am putting out a request. We are having a baby here soon in the Smith household, just a couple of weeks away. And I'm asking if you have any suggestions for videos. You can, again, leave those down in the comments as well. And of course, if you have questions about PPP, I'd be happy to answer them as well. It's an interesting time right now. Some people are excited because school's letting out or businesses are opening back up, but it's also a very difficult time for a lot of you. Businesses are opening up slow. Money is not coming in yet. So if you're finding these videos valuable, please subscribe, hit like, and ring that notification bell. It really helps me keep going, especially keeping you up to date on all these different changing of the rules and the topics. So I really appreciate it, and thanks. Also, we launched a brand new private Facebook group for people who love talking money and helping others learn about money too. Please feel free to join, and you can help craft exactly what this community is going to look like moving forward. All right, as always, I'm Rich, and until next time.